553. Esther pleads for the Jews. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that was done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, howling with a loud and bitter lamentation. 2. And he came even as far as the king's gate, for it was unlawful for any man to enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. 3. And in every province, wherever the king's decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. 4. So when Esther's eunuchs and her maidens came in and told her, the queen was exceedingly disturbed, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. 5. Then Esther called for Hathan, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to know what this was and why it was. 6. So Hathan went forth to Mordecai to the streets of the city which were in front of the king's gate. 7. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. 8. He also gave a copy of the writing of the decree that was issued in Shushan the palace, to show it to Esther, and to charge her to go in to the king to make supplication to him, and to make request before him for her people. 9. And Hathan came in and told Esther the words of Mordecai. 10. Again Esther spoke to Hathan, and commanded him to Mordecai, saying, 11. All the king's servants know that whosoever, whether man or woman, comes to the king into the inner court, who is not called for him, there is but one law, to put him to death, except the one to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 3 days. 12. And he told Mordecai Esther's words. 13. Then Mordecai told him to tell Esther, think not in yourself that you shall escape because you are in the king's house, more than all the other Jews. 14. For if you altogether remain silent this time, then relief and salvation shall arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you have been called to come to the kingdom for such a time as this? 15. Then Esther told him to return Mordecai this answer. 16. Go gather together all the Jews who are present in Shushan, the palace, and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. And I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and then I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. 17. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. She's a queen now. She's a queen now. I forget. Chapter 5. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, opposite the king's house, and the king was sitting upon his royal throne opposite the gate of the house. 2. And when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and held the top of the golden scepter. 3. Then the king said to her, what troubles you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? It shall be given you, even to half of the kingdom. 4. Nancy answered, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come to the banquet I have prepared for him. 554. Esther prepares a banquet. 5. Then the king said, make haste and to find Haman, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. 6. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you. 7. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and my request is, 8. If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king to grant my petition, to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I shall prepare for them tomorrow, as the king has said. 9. Then Haman went out that day joyful and glad in heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai sitting in the king's gate, that he neither stood up nor moved for him, Haman was full of indignation against Mordecai. 10. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, and when he went out to his home, he sent and brought all his friends and Zeresh his wife. 11. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and how the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. 12. Haman said moreover, even Esther the queen did not let no man come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared but me, and tomorrow I am invited by her together with the king. 12. Haman said moreover, even Esther the queen did to by her tomorrow with 13. Yet all this does not suffice me, as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, for he does not move from before me. 14. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged upon it. Then go in merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman exceedingly, and he had the gallows made. Chapter 6. On that night the king could not sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. 2. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, the keepers of the door, who had sought to lay hands on King Achsherash. 13. And the king said, what honor and what dignity has been conferred upon Mordecai for this? Then the king's servants and his ministers said to him, there is nothing done for him. 4. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was coming into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. 5. So the king's servant said to him, behold, Haman is standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. 6. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what shall be done to the man to whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than myself? 7. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor. 8. Let the royal apparel be brought which the king wears, and the horse which the king rides, and let the royal crown be set upon his head. 9. And let the apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, and let him array the man whom the king delights to honor, and mount him on the horse, and take him round through the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. 10. And the king said to him, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken. 555. Esther denounces Haman. 11. Then Haman took the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the streets of the city and proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. 12. And Mordecai came in to the king's gate, but Haman went to his house mourning and having his head covered. 13. And Haman told Zeresh his wife everything that had befallen him. Then his friends and Zeresh his wife said to him, if Mordecai is of the Jewish race, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but will surely again be humbled before him. 14. And while he was still talking with them, the king's couriers arrived and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared.